we are rewarded by our brains, and we know from the research that the reward centres that are activated in your brain, say when you eat some chocolate or someone gives you some money, those similar centres are activated when we do something kind for someone else. And in fact, if you put people in a brain scanner and either give them money or you get them to give away money, there are actually extra areas as well that are activated when they give away the money.
Claudia, thank you so much for coming on. We're so excited to talk to you about your book and about your work. And I thought it'd be good to just kick off by asking you how you got into what you are interested in, to happiness. Obviously, you're a professor of psychology, you are a broadcaster, you're an author, you have lots of strings to your bow. Was there anything that kind of led you down this route, or like a catalyst that kind of set you off on this journey, or is it something you've always been interested in?
That's a really interesting question. I think it does go back quite a long way. When I was 14, I knew by then already that I wanted to work in radio or the media in some way, and I started doing volunteering for hospital radio in my local hospital in Bedfordshire. And I used to do a really genuinely not good at all program called Claudia's Sunday Requests, and I'm no DJ, so it was not very good. But what was really interesting and what I really enjoyed about it was I used to go around the wards to see the patients beforehand on a Sunday afternoon, to see what requests they'd like me to play. And then in those days, you could sit in hospital and have little headphones on, and you could listen to hospital radio and you could hear your request. And I got really interested in talking to those patients. And particularly the older ladies used to save up their requests for me. Not, I think, probably so that they could listen to the request, but more so that I would go and talk to them and they'd have someone to chat to. And then they used to start telling me all sorts of things. So they used to sometimes tell me that terrible things, like they'd sort of say, I've got these weird symptoms of, like, I've got black blood coming out my mouth or something like that. And they'd tell me and make me promise not to tell the nurses or the doctors. And I was like 14 and used to say, I think you should tell a doctor about this. And they'd say, no, you must promise not to tell them, they're really busy. I was like, even though they're busy, I just think you should tell them. And I'd say, shall I tell the nurses on the way out? Because I was always chatting to the nurses. I'll tell the nurses if you like. And they go, no, you mustn't. And it just got me really interested in psychology in a way. And I did it for 4 years. And I just got really interested in, why are they telling the wrong person this in a way, and what was it about having this person that they could talk to every Sunday that they did like about that? So when it came to choosing a subject to study at university, I knew I wanted to do something I hadn't done before. I was really into science, but also into arts as well. And I wanted something that was a bit of a mixture of those things. And psychology has got lots of statistics, which I like, but also it's very applicable to real life, and it's about people, and what could be more interesting than people. So that's what got me into doing psychology. And then for a long time I had kind of twin careers between psychology, lecturing, and working. I worked for BBC Local Radio all through university, and then worked for Radio 5 Live when it had just started, and then started making features for Radio 4. And at first those would be about anything at all, particularly when I was working at 5 Live, it was general news, so it could be on anything. But then I got more and more interested in wanting to do things that were to do with science or health or psychology. And then gradually I've worked out that what I really want to do and try to do now in all the stuff I do to do with communicating science and communicating psychology is that there's all this amazing research going on, and what I want is for people to be able to put this into practice in their own lives, because all of this stuff is based on evidence. I'm very, very into evidence, not sort of just any old nonsense that people make up. But we could be using all these things, and if we don't know about them, then we can't. And so what I want to do is try to, whether it's through books or radio, podcasts, whatever it is, TV that I've done, then I'm just trying to communicate that evidence.
It's quite a niche, actually, and I feel like you found your niche, because you might be interested in psychology or the sciences, for example, the social sciences, but being able to convey these things in a sort of palatable way, and you've got the broadcasting background, and you've got a great voice, by the way.
Oh, thank you, very kind.
Very good broadcasting voice, and a lovely way of talking. So I feel like you have found that niche, that way of communicating.
Yeah, and I do really love it, because it is amazing when, one of my previous books was about rest. It was called The Art of Rest. And one of the things in that was saying that it is okay to rest, and that it's good for your mental health to rest, and you shouldn't feel guilty about it. And I cannot believe the number of people who've come up to me. I talk a lot at festivals and science things and, you know, more general events and public events, and the number of people that come up and say that just that one thought that you shouldn't feel guilty about resting, that it's good for you, have made a difference to them is sort of astonishing. And I think if people just find one line in a book that makes a difference for them, that's enough in a way. And how amazing is that, to be able to, you know, it's not my idea that rest is good for us, it's what the research says, but how nice that people could put that into practice.
Yeah. Oh God, it's so true. That's something that I needed to hear today.
Rest is allowed. I give you permission to rest.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
If,
And
right now, if that's okay.
Now it's like it's going lie down. I'll take over.
I'm very jet lagged. I got about 3 hours sleep last night because I was just on a different time zone entirely.
Oh no!
And I'm almost so tired that I'm not tired anymore.
Oh, I know what you mean. You've almost kind of gone through
past
it.
Yeah,
that's
into
horrible.
the giggly phase.
Horrible.
I mean, communication's obviously a big thing, and we're talking about that now. Like, obviously, going into the hospitals, and even at a young age, like being trusted with some quite life-defining moments with regards to people's health, and then wanting to. So I assume you come across as someone who's easy to communicate with. Like, and we're talking about kindness, and obviously you've got your book, The Keys of Kindness, Keys to Kindness. And I wondered if you could define for us a bit about what kindness means to you. How do you define kindness?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because when you look at the research done on it, definitions vary. But the one I like the best is that kindness is something that's done with the aim of benefiting someone else. And I say the aim because it doesn't always work. You know, sometimes it will backfire occasionally. People don't always want to receive what you think is an act of kindness, and I think we have to be prepared for that. But it is about benefiting someone else. And it can range from tiny things, you know, just saying thank you, really, or complimenting somebody, right through to saving someone's life. And in between, there are the thousands of cups of tea that get made, or the favours that people do for people, or the showing people the way, or opening doors, or picking up things people have dropped, or cars. You know, just on my way here today, just now, cars on both sides of the road stopped for me to cross the road when I was having difficulties crossing the road because it was really busy. And that was probably meant about 6 cars stopped altogether. So that was 6 people doing me, a stranger, a favour. And how nice is that?
How nice would it be if one of those people was listening to this episode as well? I was like,
I stopped for her.
Well, it's interesting because there is that philosophical question around, like, is there such a thing as a selfless act? Because because when we are kind, we benefit from that as well. Is that? Do you think that's true? Can we be selfless?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think because, in a way, you could say because the trouble is that we benefit from it, but this is intended in a good thing. I think we have, and if you look at the evidence, we've evolved to cooperate, and cooperation is how humans succeed. And over the thousands and thousands of years, it is by getting together in groups that on the whole humans have succeeded, and succeeded in achieving things and surviving and staying safe, and making future generations. And so we are rewarded by our brains, and we know from the research that the reward centres that are activated in your brain, say when you eat some chocolate or someone gives you some money, those similar centres are activated when we do something kind for someone else. And in fact, if you put people in a brain scanner and either give them money or you get them to give away money, there are actually extra areas as well that are activated when they give away the money. So that warm glow that we say we feel when we do something kind is actually represented in the brain. You know, this is a real thing. We can see it. And so it is true that we benefit and stand to benefit when we do kind things. And that does make it difficult, in a way, to do a completely selfless act, because even if you don't see the results that you get, and I suppose that's the case often if you're, say, just giving some money to charity, you don't know really individually who it's going to. So you can't actually see the results for that person. They're not going to be able to thank you individually. But you can still imagine that it's done some good, and so you still feel the good. I mean, I love the fact that there's a whole episode of Friends based on is there such a thing as a selfless act, where Phoebe tries to do something selfless and all the time finds that there's some benefit for her. And I think, and sometimes people will say, well, that means they doesn't count. That means these things aren't true kindnesses. And I disagree, really. I think it's okay to benefit and to know that you'll benefit. And if that results in some more kindness, then what's wrong with that? As long as it's still authentic, as long as it's still full for the benefit of that other person, then even if you do it thinking, oh, well, they'll feel good and so will I, well, so what if that results in more kindness and more nice things? Because we know from research that when people receive kindness, they feel seen, they feel grateful, they feel warm, they feel happier. Those are all good things in my book. So I don't get too tied up with this idea of, oh, but it benefits us too, so it must be kind of wrong in some way. And sometimes you'll see people criticising celebrities. There's a thing known as tainted altruism, which is when people are, they're kind, but they get something from it, so too much from it, so it's not seen as good anymore. And sometimes people will, criticise celebrities for giving away a lot of money to charity. But at least they are giving it, and that is having really good benefits, and they could be giving away lots of other money that we don't know about. They haven't said it, so we don't know about it. It could be that this is just the tip of the iceberg and that they're keeping quiet about it. So why criticise them for it? And yes, you could say, oh, well, they get good publicity from it, but so does the charity. They might pay a fortune for that kind of advertising to get that kind of publicity. If someone's going to do it for free, then as long as it's still well meant, then
absolutely.
I think that's okay.
We found that a lot, I think, at the beginning, like with lockdown, for example, there was a lot of criticisms for like Premier League footballers, like, for this, that and the other. And actually it turned out there was lots of anecdotal evidence of Premier League footballers being very generous with their money, even though obviously they earn a lot of money and they're kind of criticised for that. And how lucky they are and that they have this. But a lot of them do loads for their communities and everything, and that it wasn't till people started looking into it a bit more that actually could see that, they don't shout about it. They just do it.
They're just doing it, and they don't have to do it. And
no,
you can
exactly.
Say, oh, well, they can afford to do it. They've got loads of money. But not everyone who can afford to do it does do it.
Does it, exactly.
I just think we should be nice to anyone who does, because if it benefits people, and that's what we want. And I hate the idea that somebody might be put off doing something kind, thinking, oh, but what will other people think of me for doing that? That seems a sad sort of state of affairs where we might criticise someone for being kind and put them off it.
Yeah. I found also that sometimes when you are outwardly sort of philanthropic and you donate to lots of charities, then sometimes people go the other way and they're like, well, why aren't you donating to this cause, or you should actually be raising money for this or raising attention for this as well.
You should be giving your money to every charity.
And then it almost becomes
millions of thousands of
like
charities.
kind of like some kind of entitlement, like, well, you've given money to this wildlife charity, but what about all the people that are dying?
I think that's a really common one. It's all very well the wildlife, but what about the people dying right now? And in a way you want people to choose different charities, because all of these things need to be done. They're all good causes, so they all need to be done. You want people to, if someone is going to devote their time to, I don't know, a community garden and spend days and days of their week on it, that's great. Yes, they're not I don't know, saving the lives of somebody different, but what they are doing is really helping other people's well-being and maybe saving lives in a different way. Who knows? Yeah.
And I mean, you might be able to speak on this a little bit from a psychological perspective, but from my personal experience, when I've donated to a charity or done something kind, it's usually from a place of love and passion for that thing and wanting to do it. And when I felt kind of pressured into donating or doing something, there's almost like a resentful energy behind that, and then it's not so much kindness, it's just kind of like reactive behavior. So I guess it's better to donate to what's important to you, even if it's not the most important topic for other people and stuff like that.
I think that's absolutely true. And there's been lots of research done on psychology of volunteering and the benefits of volunteering, and that some of those benefits people get from it, part of it is about knowing they've done the good thing, but there's also lots of fringe benefits, like meeting some like-minded people. They may be making completely new friends. They may be learning new skills in the thing that they do. It may be filling up time where they felt a bit lonely, and it may be improving their loneliness, and that's all okay as well. And of course people choose the things to volunteer for that they think they're going to like. If you hate gardening, you don't choose to do work on your community gardening, and it would be a bit of a daft thing to do that. Or if you hate talking to people, then you're not going to go and go around hospitals. You need to do something where you would benefit from doing that, and where you would enjoy it yourself, and then people are much more likely to do it. And the amount that people get out of volunteering, that the evidence shows, is amazing. Even living longer is quite incredible.
Interesting. So would you say from a psychological perspective, would you say that humans are wired to be slightly more cynical towards people's kindness? Like there might be some ulterior motive, or, you know, if someone's really kind to you, then there's some sort of selfish reason behind that? Or are we wired to be the opposite and to want the kindness, would you say?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we are certainly wired to be kind to people at the beginning. So if you look at toddlers, I mean, I love the experiments with toddlers because they're so sweet, because you think toddlers are these you know, creatures who think sort of me all the time, and, you know, they don't tend to. I remember one, you know, friend of mine who's got her she was, of course, carrying the scooter, as parents often end up doing, tripped over the scooter in the middle of the street, and she was sort of bleeding and in agony, and the toddler took absolutely no notice and carried on, you know, having the tantrum that the toddler was having. And it was kind of, whatever, she's lying in the street bleeding, whatever, why can't I have whatever it was he wanted? And so you may think, oh, well, you know, yes, that's what toddlers are like. But actually, given the chance, they will do kind things as well. And so there's lovely experiments done by a guy called Michael Tomasello at the Max Planck Institute. And he gets a toddler in a room, and they have an adult who's carrying a load of magazines, a pile of magazines, and wants to open a cupboard door. They can't open the cupboard because their hands are full with the magazines. And they wait to see whether the toddler will help them or not. And in the vast majority of cases, you know, some of the trials, on 91% of cases, the toddler will help open the door. And he videos them, and they look really pleased. They sort of puff out their chest. They're so pleased that they did something for the adult. It's really sweet. And then to make it a bit harder, there are experiments where the toddler is playing with toys that they really like. So they'd have to leave the toys they like to go and help the adult, and still the vast majority will do it. And then they make it even harder. They're playing with the toy they really like, and they have to climb over a load of plastic obstacles, bless them, and still the majority will help. They like helping when they can help, and he calls them indiscriminate altruists, and I like this phrase. They will help anyone. So they found that they will help other children who are less likely to have good stuff for them, as just as likely to help children as they are to help an adult. Because you could say, oh, well, they'll help an adult because the adult might give them something good at the end of it. But and they know that other children haven't got good stuff for them, but they will help any of them. As they get slightly older, they get slightly more wary of strangers, and they get slightly, there's that age where they get slightly more clingy to their parents, and they start to learn that maybe you shouldn't completely trust everybody, and partly we're teaching them, you know, not to just go off with anybody, and so people then become, or children then become slightly more suspicious, if you like, of who they will be, of who they'll trust, and who might be being kind to them, and for what reason. But in general, most people, the vast majority of people, still think that most people are nice, and that most people will be kind to them and will accept, you know, kindness from most people. And it's more if people have grown up learning that there's a reason to be suspicious. You know, if they're badly treated and neglected all the time, then not surprisingly, they learn that, you know, you can't trust people because they've been badly treated. When people are treated well, they tend to trust other people. Interesting.
Now, in the book, you talk about the 7 keys to kindness. Could you take us through some of those?
Yeah, so these are the key things that I think we need to know about kindness, and that are important to know. And one is, which is kind of what we've been talking about in a way, is that there's more kindness in the world than you might think. That we see the sort of big bad world out there. We see the terrible things that are happening. We see enormous cruelty that people do to other people, and enormous suffering. And often we see this on the news, and we remember those things. And there's a reason those things make the news. You know, it's not news that you can't keep saying on the news 100 people weren't killed in London last night. But if 100 people were killed last night, then we need to obviously know about it, and it's really important to know about. And so that's why negative things do predominate in the news. Every so often people try and make programs that are just about happy things, that are just about good news, and they sort of work for a while, but in the end people do want to know about the things that are going on, and need to know. And if we're going to, you know, change things or have any fights for justice, we can't just sort of turn a blind eye to the terrible things that are going on. But the trouble is that those things also remain salient, and there's loads of psychological evidence showing that we notice negative things more. Just as you know, people will remember if one person says something mean about something they've done or criticizes their work, you can remember the exact wording of what they said. You know, and people will remember the one negative review and what someone said about them rather than all the nice ones and the good ones. But we remember those things and we're stung by those negative things. And the same happens if you show people a photograph of a load of faces of a crowd and you tell them that one person is happy and one person is angry. And they are clearly doing that. People are much faster to find the angry face than they are to find the happy face. And again, we're wired that way because if a lion is following you up the street, you need to know that. If a kitten is following you up the street, then you don't need to pay as much attention to that. You don't need to worry. So we're wired to notice the negative things. The trouble is that then in modern life we notice those negative things and it makes us feel as if the world is negative and nothing nice is happening. So there is more kindness in the world is one of the big things to notice. Another of the keys to kindness is that kindness makes you feel good, and that's okay, like we've talked about. And a big one for me is that kind people can be winners, and that kindness can get you places. I think often kindness is seen as something that's all very nice, but really it's a little bit soft, and that you'll get walked all over if you're too kind, particularly at work, that it's not a good idea to be kind at work, and that everyone will just start taking you for granted and you'll never succeed. And the evidence just doesn't show that at all. Firstly, I think, which do you want to be remembered as? Do you want to be the nice, kind colleague who, when you leave, everyone says, oh, and they were so kind and they were so nice? Or do you want to just be the successful one? Now, some people will say they just want to be the successful one. They're not there to make friends. They don't care. But life's ever such a lot easier if you do make friends at work. And, people make, some of my loveliest friends of all are friends I've made at work and will be lifelong friends. And that's, a really nice thing that I really value ever such a lot. And that makes work so much more fun, having nice colleagues to be friends with. But also it does make people successful. And this is not in a cynical way. So there's a guy in the States who's done, he's called Joe Folkman, and he's done really interesting work in organisational psychology. And he's taken the 360-degree feedback rating. So these are the ratings where you rate your boss about what you think about them. And he's taken the 360-degree feedback ratings about 50,000 leaders. So the 50,000 leaders are there and their employees say what they think of them. And they fill in various things about them, fill in questionnaires about what their bosses are like. And he's found that actually the bosses who are rated as the most effective tend to be the ones who are also rated as the most agreeable. And they're the kind ones, essentially. And it is so rare for a boss to be disagreeable and to score really low on agreeableness, which is a bit of a horrible word, but the word that's used, but a nice thing. But it's so rare to score high on that there's actually a 1 in 2,000 chance of being a really effective leader who's also really disagreeable. Wow. So it just doesn't get you anywhere. There is no point in being a mean leader, and especially even just from a business perspective, in these days where retaining staff is very important and finding new staff can be very difficult. You don't want to lose them. If you want to keep your staff, being unkind to them is not the way to do that. They will leave much faster. And if they ask people, when they ask people what they think of their bosses and how likely they are to leave within the next year, people who have unkind bosses are much, much more likely to say they'll leave in the next year. It makes a massive difference to people's working lives every day. And I think it's interesting that the word kindness doesn't get used much in leadership and in leadership psychology. And the word, there is a field of ethical leadership. And I think it's almost as if that word is more palatable because there is this image problem, in a sense, with kindness. I'd like us to reclaim the word as a good word, have a kindness revolution and say it's okay, and a good thing. But I think there is still this fear that it's a kind of soft thing. Possibly a bit of a female thing, not in a good way.
Yeah, feminine, airy, fair, and nice guys finish last as well. There's definitely the reputation of kindness.
I think with regards to business, I think there is that strong leader who's gonna just make sure everything's right and bulldoze through life, and hopefully everyone will follow suit, kind of thing.
And actually it's not the case that kind leadership is a soft option. So a kind ethical leader, it can actually be really hard because it means sometimes having really hard conversations. So if there's a situation where one person is really slacking in the team and not doing their work, and everyone else has to do their work, what should a kind, ethical leader do about that? You could say, oh, well, they should just leave them to it, because it'd be a bit unkind to pick on them, wouldn't it, and to say anything about it. But actually, that's really unkind and unfair on everyone else who's working really hard and picking up their work. So the ethical, kind leader needs to have the difficult conversation, which is to try to find out what's going on here. Why is this person slacking? You know, are they afraid they can't do it properly? Are they worried about it for some reason? Is it just not the job for them? Are they really unhappy doing it? And should they be maybe doing something different? And a kind leader will have that conversation, but it doesn't mean it's an easy thing. So I think it's not the soft option to be a kind, ethical leader. And some of the work on ethical leadership as well suggests that bosses should even announce to their staff, this is going to be an ethical place, and I'm going to lead as an ethical leader and set an example here. And then they are setting themselves up in a way for people to criticise them and look at that, and that can be difficult. And I think if you think of the ex-New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, now she said kindness has been the strongest thing in her leadership and has made her what she is. And there have been all sorts of people pointing at people who don't agree with her policies, and of course not everyone's going to ever agree with one politician's policies, saying, well, why is it kind if this happens? What's kind about that then? What's kind about the fact that some people are homeless? What's kind about this? And has been almost a hostage to fortune in a way for her, that people will then accuse her of being unkind for having said she'd be kind in the first place, which I think is a real shame, because then that might put other people off being kind.
Yeah. And I guess there's sort of like kindness and compassion go hand in hand in many ways. You know, some people might say, well, it's not very kind to fire this person, but you can do it in a compassionate way, and actually it's not very kind to keep someone on if they're not for the job, you know.
And it's also not very kind to never lay anyone off if a business is contracting and then everyone loses their job. You know, sometimes there will have to be say redundancies in companies, and that's got to be done the kindest, nicest way.
Totally. And I'm so glad that you've mentioned this as well, because I think even the title of this podcast, I'm already thinking like we need to name it something that's going to make it palatable for men and women, because I feel like you have a podcast titled about kindness, it's going to be all the women tuning in like, oh yeah, it's going to be about kindness. But it, you know, as humans, we are a community, right? And we've already sort of spoken about the fact that we're sort of like pack animals. We are tribal creatures. And so in business, that kind of makes sense, you know, like it's who you know, not what you know, and you want to make friends with people and have people in the right places as well, and being truly kind, it is important. I think it makes total sense to me, and I think this is something that so many people can take away. And
so many people in business will say it's about relationships, and it's about forming those ideally relationships with a client over a long period where the people work together for the benefit of both of them. You know, one's trying to maybe sell something and one's trying to buy something, but they can do this together.
And I think it's important as well to distinguish the difference between being genuinely kind and compassionate, and it's all about the intention, rather than thinking, oh, well, if people just think I'm kind, then that's great. And then actually being quite inauthentic and just being the nice guy, but actually not really nice guy or gal, you know, or woman. But then, you know, not actually maybe speaking up or shirking responsibilities, maybe not having difficult conversations, as you mentioned. But, you know, I'm the nice person, everyone loves me. You know, it kind of reminds me of In the Office. I don't know if you've seen the American one, but he just wants to be everyone's friend. Friend. And, you know, maybe that's actually not very kind, because he ends up like not wanting to fire someone, and then it just becomes this huge mess. It's
and it does need to be authentic, because otherwise, you know, people will have come across bosses where the boss is pretending to be everyone's friend, but actually just doing what the boss above them tells them to do and never standing up for their staff. That's not kind. And then there's no good then trying to just sort of go to the pub and be everyone's mates if you're never going to stand up for them when it's, you know, when it's really needed. And I think it is interesting, this whole sort of feminine idea about kindness, and that then means it's a negative thing for some people, because when you look at the research on how kind people are, there's a much smaller difference. Women tend to score slightly more on those scales, but only slightly more. And there's a much bigger difference, say, in personality makes a much more difference than sex. So it's extroverts tend to, on average, score higher, and that makes much more difference than whether it's a man or a woman or not. And so there are, plenty of men being just as kind as women out there.
Yeah. So I suppose it's, in conclusion, it's about the intention behind it.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably lots of people, myself included, who have come across those people that seem really nice, really kind. And then once things get difficult, or, you're up against some real struggle or conflict.
Very true. Yes.
There's always going to be conflict in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
There's always, or even like living arrangements or romantic relationships, friendships. There's always going to be conflict in life. And I think that's when you suddenly realise people's true colours. If your intentions aren't really about being kind and compassionate and helping others, that's when it kind of comes out. It's not sustainable, I don't think, to keep that kindness going. Yeah. Many ways. But
I think that's very true. Yeah. Then you sometimes do see whether people are whether it's coming from an authentic place or not.
Yeah. So I think that was the third one that we've just covered. So we had kindness is everywhere in the world, and kindness is good for us, and that's okay. Yeah. And then we've had kindness can make you successful, which is I'm very happy about.
Yeah.
And then
there is don't get too hung up on motives, which we've talked about, the motives that it's okay if it benefits you and benefits them, as long as it, as we've said, comes from an authentic place and is about benefiting that person. And then there's a slightly different one, which is that anyone can be a hero. And so I see, extreme heroism as in saving people's lives, or what's known as extreme altruism, which is things like donating a kidney to a stranger. Those things are that heroism doesn't have to be something that only some people can do. So it's really interesting. Whenever there has been some kind of heroic event, the person will always say, "Oh, I just did what anyone would do." And I saw this, the other day when there were floods. There was an extraordinary, scary video of film of a car with a woman and a toddler, and the car was about to be swept under a bridge and underwater. And a really brave guy climbed down, and the woman was shouting to him that she had a baby in the back. So he broke the back window, got the baby, then ran back to his car, got a rope, and tied the car to the bridge, and went in and got the woman and saved the woman as well. And all the time this water was, you just thought any second he and that car are going to get swept away, and he did it. And he said, as people always do, I did what anyone would have done. Now there were other people around as well, and but he did do this thing. So heroes always think they're special. Sorry, I said that completely wrong. Heroes always think they're not special, whereas we know they are because they did it at that moment. But you can decide that if a moment like this comes, that you will try to act and that you won't be embarrassed about acting. And I think one of the things that often holds us back from being kinder is that we're afraid of being embarrassed. And so there was a big study that I was part of, run by Sussex University, called the Kindness Test. And 60,000 people took part, and we launched it on my programme All in the Mind on Radio 4 and on my World Service programme. So 60,000 people took part, and we asked them all sorts of things about kindness. So it's the biggest piece of research that's been done of this type. And one of the things we asked people was, what are the barriers to being kinder to other people? And the top one, which I thought was really interesting, was fear of being misinterpreted. And that was in this country and in Europe as well, although in Europe not having time also came high up as well, and in America social media came higher. And I think that makes sense. We did this just after pandemic times, and I think there's been so much polarisation in America, particularly during the pandemic, during social media and anti-vaxxers and so on, that I think that might be why that was in particular. But I think this fear of being misinterpreted is really interesting. And And I kept a diary, a sort of kindness diary while I was writing the book, where I just noted down things where I saw someone being kind to someone else, really everyday things, or where I was kind to someone else or someone was kind to me, or where I thought about being kind to someone else. And I noticed I was doing this thing of not wanting to be embarrassed, particularly with strangers, not wanting to have got the wrong end of the stick or look a bit stupid. And I thought of myself as a kind of hesitant helper in a way. And so I'd do things like... I was running along the street, doing running, as in jogging running. It's jogging, really. And from far away, I could see a man and a woman getting a big mattress out of a van together, and struggling with it a bit. And I had trainers on and I wasn't carrying anything, so I could help. And I was quite far away at this point. And I was thinking, shall I offer to help, or will they think that I think they can't do it? Will the woman in particular think that I think she can't do it because she's a woman? And so I started thinking all these things. And will I offend them by asking to help, if I can help? And then by the time I got there, because I run quite slowly, they got in the door and they got in a gate, and then they were trying to carry it inside a garden up an outdoor staircase, which looked really hard. But the gate was high and the fence, and the fence was high. So in order to do it, I was going to have to go into the garden to ask to help. And then that felt too intrusive, and so I didn't. And I noticed many of these situations where I thought about helping, but I wasn't sure if I got the right person who dropped the thing. And was it them or was it them? And am I going to look stupid if I've got the wrong one? And it was stopping me doing it. And then it made sense of all these people, these thousands of people saying what stopped them was the same thing. And I've made this is the biggest difference that writing the book has made to me. I've made a really conscious effort to think, if I have got the wrong end of the stick and I'm a bit embarrassed, it's not the end of the world, because I'm not going to see them again because they're strangers. And so now I do things like the other day I was running and I saw a car was trying to turn into a driveway but seemed to have stopped, and I couldn't really work out why. And then I saw there was one of those Lime bikes was on the pavement on its side in the way, but I didn't quite realise this till I'd slightly run past. So I had to turn around and run back in order to move the bike and help. And I wouldn't have done that before because I'd have felt a bit silly that I hadn't worked out what was going on, but I'm always quite slow to work out what's going on. And I might have felt a bit silly before and not done that. And then I thought, they're not going to care. And in fact, the driver looked really pleased because he didn't have to get out the car, and I moved the bike. And they're really hard to move, those bikes. You try and drag them, it's actually really hard. But he didn't think I looked stupid at all. He didn't care, and yet I was worried about that. And I think that's what people are doing. And sometimes people are embarrassed to try and help when it's a really, really serious situation. Yeah. Because they don't want to be the one to I don't know, tell everyone they should get out of the building in case they've got it wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And they've done they did experiments back in the 60s and 70s in psychology where they had smoke. They arranged for what looked like smoke to be coming from under a door. It would be dry ice, but if lots of people were in the waiting room, people were less likely to do anything about it because they just assume, well, everyone else is. The responsibility was diffused among the people, and they'd let all the people do it. Whereas actually you can. So there's been some research suggesting you can decide in advance. It's estimated people may have 5 occasions on average in their life where there's a chance to possibly even save a life, and that you could decide in advance, when that occasion comes, I am going to step up and try and do something. Now, it may not be that you're going to go into a river and get somebody, and sometimes we know that can be a really, really dangerous thing to do, and it's better to try and throw somebody something. But and it may be that you're not physically strong enough to intervene in a fight, but you may be able to decide you're going to be the one who phones the police or goes and gets some other help, or films it from a safe distance, but the people know you're filming it, so that they stop the thing they're doing. But that you can decide, I am going to be the person who will do something and help somebody, and that almost deciding that in advance seems to be helpful because you've not got to then make a decision at that moment. You think, this is one of those moments, and I'm going to do the thing.
A few years back, actually, I was driving in the car with a friend of mine, and it was quite late. It was not late. It was maybe like 7 or 8 in the evening, but it was cold. It was winter. It was very dark, and where I live, it's sort of the countryside. So we were driving around these like really tight, small country lanes, and we saw this elderly man walking in the road. And normally, if I was driving on my own, I probably wouldn't stop because I'd be embarrassed to stop, pull up next to a stranger and be like, "You're right. Do you want to ride somewhere?" And I think especially as women, you're taught
as a stranger, you're going to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. And there was a split second where I sort of said to my friend, oh, that looks strange. Should we see if he's okay? My friend sort of went, oh, I'm sure he's fine. And in that moment, I don't know why, I just intuitively was like, no, stop the car, let's go. And we literally turned back and went up to this guy. And I have no idea why I did this, because it's, again, I probably wouldn't normally, to be fair. But then we stopped for this guy and he was so grateful. He may be like in his 80s, but he decided to go out for a hike in the day, had gotten lost, and then he didn't have any food or water and couldn't find his car. So we gave him a lift to his car, and it turned out it was miles away. There was no way. And I think he was walking in the wrong direction. Who knows what would have happened to this man? I'm sure he would have been okay. Maybe someone else would have picked him up, or he would have knocked on someone's door or something. But I was thinking as we were driving along, oh my God, thank God we stopped, because who knows what could have happened. And this is somebody's dad or granddad, you know.
Yeah, and you'd want someone to help yours.
God, if my dad was in that situation, it would be heartbreaking. So I was so glad that I did that. And then after that, I sort of went through a phase for like maybe a few months where I was like trying to help everyone that I could, because I'm like, you never know. And then it wears off. You become your typical cynical self. But yeah, I think it's a really good, just a nice story to illustrate that you just never know.
You never know. And I think the important thing obviously is to ask rather than to offer your help as a would you like help or not, rather than forcing anyone to do it. I'm going to help you. A friend of mine who's blind says that he barely dares stand next to crossings because people drag him across the road when he doesn't want to. He's just stopped because he's going to he's listening to something on his phone or something, and he's just stopped for a moment, and people will literally just take him by the arm and drag him. And he always says, his big tip is don't do things to blind people before they've said that they want you to.
You might as well wait here, because I'll need to go back across the other road.
Exactly. Exactly. But to just ask the people of, do you need any help crossing the road, or maybe they're you're completely fine. And so and because sometimes people don't want help, and that's fine. It's just so if you see someone looking for the way on their phone, they don't always want to be shown the way by you. Instead, they're trying to work out where it is on their phone so that they can go the whole way that way. So so I think it's important to ask, but that to be prepared to be a bit embarrassed, and that's okay. Yeah,
and I think as a society in England particularly, we're very driven by etiquette and social norms and what's okay, what's not okay. We're very polite, and even if that comes across as passive aggressive, or if we're not helpful because we are avoiding doing anything that's over the top or embarrassing. I feel like some cultures are a lot better at that than us.
And in fact, we found that people, when we asked people how they felt when someone was kind to them, then people felt warm, and they felt happy, and they felt grateful, and they felt seen. So those are all good things. So why wouldn't we want someone to feel that? And yet we still sometimes are nervous about doing that ourselves.
So true.
So we've touched on this a little bit with regards to social media, and we've you obviously mentioned about how polarized we are now, and we live in a very binary kind of world where you're on one side of the fence or the other. Can we be kind online? Do we see kindness online? Is that a thing? Because you could go on Twitter at any given time, and you will probably see quite a lot of anger and hate and stuff.
And there certainly is a lot of anger and a lot of hate, but there also is a lot of kindness. I think it comes back to again the salience of the things you notice. We notice these arguments and people being horrible to people because it is so horrible, but that there is a lot of kindness on social media as well, and that there are people who are really comforting other people, supporting other people. You can, the benefit of social media is, however, say, I don't know, rare the thing that you are experiencing is, somebody else has experienced something similar, and you can now find those people. And that did not used to be the case. Somebody even say something like a rare disease. The few people with a rare disease in the world can now get together and exchange notes on that and support each other over that and do. And the amount of people who are being really kind and supportive to people is high. And also just the people who are, I think it's an act of kindness when people are making entertaining memes and just making things that entertain the rest of us. Yes, some of them, if they're really, really successful, then people are, getting, advertising if they've got loads and loads of followers. But loads of people aren't. Loads of people are just doing it because it's fun. And they're just putting up things to entertain other people and make other people's day a little bit nicer. And how nice is that? So I think it's not the case that social media is all horribleness, and it also depends who you decide to follow and who you decide to look for. And we of course know, nobody, companies won't explain exactly how the algorithms work, but one thing we do know is that the more that things seem to go up to the top if they are commented on a lot, or if they get lots of just attention, and get lots of people opening whatever it is and reading whatever it is. But so in a sense, rather than arguing with the people who said something we think is outrageous, which gets them more attention, which gets them up to the top, which gets them more attention, which gets them up to the top, and we go in a cycle of that, is to reward the reasonable people instead by liking their comments, which may seem a bit boring. And some people say, oh, well, that's too boring. But if everybody decided to reward the people who are reasonable and say, well, it's very nuanced, it's a very complicated situation, then they would go up to the top instead, and we'd see those people, and we get less of an idea of, oh my God, what a horrible world it is out there. It is true, I think, that people do sometimes, they say things on social media they wouldn't dream of saying to people in real life, but those people who are reading them are experiencing them as if they're in real life, and that's really horrible. But it is a kind of collective action problem, because the algorithms do respond to what millions of people do. And so if millions of us start following nice people and unfollowing anyone who's not going to look deliberately to see what the angry comments are, when someone's put something stupid, it's really tempting to then look at the comment. And sometimes you'll see people say, I've only come to this for the comments. You sometimes see that on Facebook. So people will just say that, I couldn't wait to read the comments on this. But that was, once you go to read the comments, that is pushing it up the algorithms. We need to do some ignoring. Like the toddlers. You ignore the toddlers' bad behaviour and you reward the good behaviour. Yeah. And it works.
It's so true. And the onus is always on us to be the sort of gatekeepers to our minds and what we're letting in, what we're watching on TV, what we're reading in the news, and social media is such a huge part of that now.
Yeah. And I think it matters. We were talking about the news that's so negative really getting people down, and there's really good evidence for how that can, and particularly if people find themselves doom scrolling, where you're looking for the bad stuff again and again. And a lot of people would have found themselves doing that during the pandemic, where you find yourself looking up infection rates 4 times a day. They didn't change more than once a day, so you were not going to find something new out, but you kept looking. And then it's tempting to do that. And there's been really interesting research from California on actually people looking at the coverage of terrible things happening, like people looking, this was obviously before social media, at 9/11 footage, and then looking at the Boston Marathon footage. And this researcher was already following people before either of these things happened, so she was able to see their baseline for their well-being before. And she found that the people, say with the Boston Marathon bombing, where people could look at the footage again and again, the people who looked at more than 5 hours a day's worth of it, which many people did when it had just happened, actually had worse, more serious psychological responses and reactions to it, higher anxiety, and in some cases even post-traumatic stress disorder, than the people who were there and witnessed it. Wow. Because they saw so much coverage of it. Now, that seems absolutely extraordinary. And yet, if you see 5 hours of it from every single angle possible, you are seeing more than you saw by being there, even though you had the fear of, that if you'd been a few metres to the right, this could have been you, which is a terrifying thought. And so as a result of that, they've come up with really sort of useful guidelines, I think, for how to protect yourself a bit from it while still staying in touch with what's going on in the news, because we do need to know. And one is to choose really carefully your media source of your news source, and to choose a reliable 1 or 2 places, and then to choose when you're going to look at that, listen to that, whatever method you are doing, and maybe not to have things like alerts, not to have constant news alerts on your phone or on your watch, because they disrupt when you're having a nice time and things are going okay, and you're perhaps talking to some friends and doing something nice. Then you get the alert saying that something terrible has happened and some more people have been killed, and you need to know that thing, but you need to know at that moment. You probably don't need to know at that moment. If you really do, because it's in your street, you're going to find out. But you don't need to know straight away.
We had this happen this morning, didn't we? We were driving up, and suddenly, my phone's got the map, Google Maps up, and then there's a notification that comes up. You might have received it as well, but it was critical. Something critical has happened at hospitals in Sussex, and ambulances are being diverted. People are being told not to go to A&E. And I said to Charles, "Oh my God, what's happened? Something terrible must have happened." My mind, I thought that it was like.
You went worst case
I
scenario,
I went like the Joker in Batman. Like someone's turned up and it's like put bombs in the hospital or something. Turns out it was just IT problem. That was the issue, and that was why my phone went crazy, was sending me all these notifications.
That just goes to show what clickbait does to you.
Wow.
Critical.
Yeah.
People being told stay away from A&E. I was like, oh my God, what if people are dying?
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Someone couldn't put the USB slot in properly.
Yeah, so he tried turning it off and tried to turn it back on again.
Yeah, and the trouble is it interrupts all those other moments.
Yeah.
Right.
So that at any moment you're suddenly stuck into this, thrown into almost a fight or flight mode. You're suddenly thrown into anxiety of what's going on. And if you keep getting that again and again and again, then that's really, really hard going on your well-being and really stressful.
Yeah.
And so if you choose that, in the morning and the evening, you're going to look properly for some news and see what's happening. Now, it's not that easy because obviously it depends what news is coming up in your social media feeds. If you want to see the other stuff, you want to see the fun stuff and what your friends are doing, that you also then get some news in that. But then you can choose not to have some of those come up in there. You can turn those off and turn alerts off, and then choose when you're going to look or listen and what you're going to listen to.
I made a conscious decision to like take the news app off my phone, and I'm like much more
I've done that
strict.
And I don't have any alerts.
I don't have any alerts for those things, and I've been much more strict about when I watch the news and the amount of news I watch. And it's not that I don't want to be informed.
Yes, you see, I do still listen. So I listen to a lot of news. But I'll listen in the morning and then in the evening, and then I might look up, say, on somewhere reliable, like the BBC website. I might look to see what news has happened in the day.
And
but I might not if I'm really busy. I might not.
And sometimes I don't know what's going on, but that's me trying to be kinder to myself. And, and I was going to ask you about that, like us trying to be kind to ourselves, and we've sort of touched on it a bit with regards to sometimes making difficult decisions around kindness, like if you're having that awkward conversation with someone, but that actually we need to do that because it's being kind of ourselves. Can you talk a bit about how we can navigate that, being kind to ourselves, but sometimes that does mean that we have to be not unkind, but like make difficult choices.
So I think it's interesting, the kind to yourself thing, and it all gets, sometimes it's been sort of commercialised a bit into sort of self-care, and you must buy a £50 candle in order to be kind to yourself. You don't have to buy a £50 candle in order to be kind to yourself. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. And so I think what matters much more is our inner voice and how we talk to ourselves. And we're often much meaner to ourselves than we would ever dream of being to a friend. So if a friend had made a mistake at work, and was worried about it, you wouldn't say to them, because you are an idiot. I always thought you were an idiot, and this proves you always will be an idiot. No one will forget it, and everyone else at work is always going to think you're an idiot as well. You would never dream of saying that to them. You would say to them, well, I'm sure you were doing your best, and everyone makes mistakes, and everyone will forget in time, and they will forgive you, and I'm sure you'll never do this same thing again, and it'll all blow over, it'll all be fine. You'll say all that, but you don't say that to yourself. And some people... There is a scale called the fear of self-compassion scale. And some people will score really high on this fear of self-compassion scale, and that they really are afraid of being nice to themselves, and will agree with statements such as, if I let myself off the hook, I'll become lazy. They sort of think if they're nice to themselves at all, it'll all go downhill and they'll become a bad, lazy person. And never do anything useful again. And it'll be a slippery slope into chaos. And this is just not the case. And so, and we do know that there is people who score high on fear of self-compassion have a higher risk of developing depression, that there are really important reasons to try to be kind to yourself, to try to show yourself some compassion, and to try to think when something's gone wrong and you are blaming yourself, what are some alternative reasons for that. Not to not take responsibility for your thing you've done, not to not sort it out, say apologise to people if that's what needs to be done, or remedy the situation in some way, but just to think, I'm a human and I was trying, and I thought I was trying my best and it didn't go right, and I'm going to try and do it right next time. but not to think this means you're the most terrible person in the world who doesn't deserve any compassion from anyone.
Yeah. Can I just ask, where do you think that fear of self-compassion comes from? Is it something from childhood or how we were brought up? And, you know, it might be a bit outdated now, I don't know, but we talk about like inner critics and inner parents and inner child and stuff like that. Where does that come from? Or do we just all have that within us?
It varies a lot. So it's everyone has it to a certain extent, a bit of an inner critic, but not to the same extent. So people will have a spread of scores, say, on the fear of self-compassion scale, and so it does vary, and it does seem to, you know, partly come down, of course, to people's upbringing, and I think what happens to people at school can also have an influence on that, and whether people were made to feel really bad about when they'd made a mistake, and whether they were made to feel, whether they were sort of loved unconditionally or made to feel that if you did something bad, you wouldn't be loved anymore and that you would be unlovable because you'd done something that was bad or made a mistake, rather than being told, well, this isn't acceptable, you can't do this thing. I still love you, but you can't do this thing. You know, you're not to do that. And sometimes parents will be doing these things with the best of intentions. You know, they're trying to create a nice, kind person. So they do tell them off if they're, say, unkind to somebody else, and bullying somebody else is not acceptable and not nice. But sometimes I think it can leave people worried that they're just not good enough. And also it's just, you know, to do with people's levels of self-esteem and satisfaction with themselves, and whether they think that they're constantly failing and aren't good enough already. Then that's going to feed into that. If people already feel they aren't good enough, then when you make a mistake, you're going to beat yourself up more for that.
Yeah, so I suppose just acknowledging that this isn't me, this is something that I've kind of grown up with, or this is something I've heard once and subconsciously taken on board as fact.
And you can do things like imagine it's you who's walking up the street. What would you say to that person if it's an outside you walking up the street, but they look like you? Are you going to tell them they're hopeless and awful? You know, you're not.
Yeah, I heard as well once, imagining the things you're saying to yourself, or even if it's someone else saying something not very kind to you that you've heard that makes you feel sad, imagine that being said to someone you love, like your child or your parent or something, and then you sort of
you would
start
defend
to see,
them from it. Yes,
and you see how ridiculous some of the stuff is. You know, like you wouldn't call your baby fat, or you know, like you wouldn't belittle your sister or your brother or something for something. So it's like sort of becoming a little bit more grounded in reality, I guess.
And there's things people can do, you know, there's various different types of compassion focused meditation and mindfulness, and some of which is about being kind to yourself. And you can do one suggestion, I really like all Paul Gilbert's work on this, on compassion, is really good. And one suggestion is to just, you know, to sort of have your hand put a hand to your chest for a moment and say, you know, I'm a human and sometimes I struggle and I'm trying, and just to sit with that for a moment and just think, yeah, you know, I'm trying. It's okay.
I love that. Amazing.
Well, Claudia, thank you so much for your time today. Your book's fantastic. The Keys to Kindness, How to Be Kind to Yourself, Others and the World. And it's out in paperback now.
It's just out in paperback now.
So fantastic. Everyone go and buy it, because it is a brilliant book. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice.
And just in case people want to find you and hear more from you, is there anywhere that people can have a look for you online?
Yes, so my website is called claudiahammond.com. That's got details of everything I'm doing. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, all at Claudia Hammond. And my radio show, All in the Mind, is a radio show and a podcast on Radio 4.
Perfect, thank you.